Good evening, everyone. Apologies for the delay. There's just some events you can't plan for, and we just had some technical issues. And for those who hung in there, we really appreciate that. So tonight we'll be presenting the second part of a two-part presentation. And just to recap, Tom Price will be presenting this information. And who is Tom Price? For those who need to be reminded, Tom has more than 50 years of successful concept, detail, project, and maintenance engineering, together with project management experience in supply chain, construction, heavy industrial, and chemical industries. He has been very concerned with where municipal government has been taking the city of Greater Sudbury, and in September of 2018 made presentations forecasting a financial tsunami for our city. So without further ado, Tom, will you take it away?
Thank you, Bob. I'm not going to waste a lot of your time because we've held you up quite a long time already. So what I'll do is I'll go straight to the presentation. The first slide that you see is one that you've seen at the last presentation, and I'll move quickly into the next slide. Again, you've seen this before. Nothing much has changed on this, except that we're going to phase 2 now, which is taxpayer capacity to meet the economic conditions that have been created. How? Again, we will not be using information bullets, sound bites, or propaganda. What we will be using is hard facts derived from Stats Canada, Workforce Planning, World Economics, Financial Accountability Office of Ontario, and City of Greater Sudbury documentations. And before I go further, events over the last week have made it necessary for me to comment on comments from the Mayor and the Chair of Finance. And I have to compliment them because in the first presentation, I showed the budget binder sheets where the numbers came from. So in making the comments that they did, and you can see them here, the Mayor said he's seen the video, it's inaccurate and unfortunate that the public is continually being provided incorrect information, causing concern and fear amongst the public that's wrong and harmful. Well, that information came directly off city budget sheets. The Chair of Finance said that Tom Price's numbers are all manipulated and his information is false. Again, that tells you that those sheets from the city have been manipulated and are false. So, it was believed that the information published by the CGS for public consumption would be accurate, true, and unmanipulated. That information was used in good faith. However, the above statements regarding that information have made it necessary to add a disclaimer to the presentations. The disclaimer, the claims that are made that the Phase 1 information was in error with suggestions that the data had been manipulated. There has been no manipulation of the data that I got from the city documentation. However, it isn't feasible to vouch for the accuracy of the published data from federal, provincial, or municipal governments. I have to assume that their published data has been vetted, been reviewed, checked, and is valid. Based on the false $25 million damage claim that CGS made to LPAT in a factum filing, it is entirely possible there are errors in the data sources that aren't evident in the published material. Further, similar to Standard & Poor's rating of the CGS credit standing, it isn't possible to perform an audit or undertake any duty of due diligence or independent verification for information received from those sources. I have no ability to go in and audit their work. I have to take the summary sheets they provided. And as you've seen, both the Mayor and the Chair of Finance has said that my information based on theirs is wrong. I appreciate them owing up to the fact that those sheets are wrong. However, I've used that information primarily for trending, to show you what's been happening progressively. So if there are minor errors, I'm going to ignore them for the rest of the presentation. I'll quickly recap what you saw in Phase 1. Phase 1, I showed the economic facts for 2014 to 2020, what's been happening over those 6 years, the increases in different departments and how they affect us. However, they've also claimed that there are conditions now due to the pandemic that are going to give us problems. Well, this financial and economic crisis was not created by the viral pandemic. However, the pandemic became the catalyst for global economic correction worldwide. The next sheet showed the annual percentage change in revenue. And we indicated that that revenue from the city taking out of our pockets was reaching tsunami levels, and that household incomes were in no way keeping up. We showed where the major tax dollars come from for the city to operate. They're the 3 green. If you can't see green, it's items 2, 3, and 4, or items 1 under federal, 2, oh boy, 2 under federal provincial, and items 1 and 2 under municipal. They account for over 90% of the municipal funding. Those have increased. The provincial funding has increased by 21%. Property taxes have increased by account for 49%, and user fees account for 22% of the budget. We also looked at salaries and benefits. Salaries and benefits since 2014 have increased by 21%. 527% or 27% of those employees are on the sunshine list. We showed you the difference between top-down and bottom-up estimating. Not that we are promoting bottom-up, but that you need to know there are methods out there that are better suited to what the city is using. We demonstrated that by considering where taxpayers evaluate a city's performance, and it's from the bottom up. You notice where taxes are wasted first. Build up from there. Excuse me. This slide shows you what we did in the first phase 1, what we reviewed. And the second portion shows you what we're going to talk about tonight. Keeping in mind, everything you're going to see comes from city, provincial, or federal documents. First of all, is the city taking us back for the future? In 1880, Canada suffered one of the worst depressions or recessions and depressions in our history. That recession lasted for 16 years until 1896. Soup kitchens were a way of life. What have we been doing in our city in the last few years? Well, we've been concentrating on soup kitchens, food banks, homeless assistance, seniors' homes, drug kitchens. And by drug kitchens, I mean the meth clinics and other places where the people who are dependent on these drugs can access safe supply. Thrift shops are the only growth commercial installations in the city. Community gardens are flourishing. And city has been considering means tests to determine who can get reduced rates in any of the service fees they charge. And the city has been concentrating on distractions. That isn't good enough. If we're going to avoid the problems, an economic growth is needed to support those as well as reversing them. We need to pull people out of that poverty situation. I've been in Sudbury for more than 50 years, and over those 50 years, Sudburyans have made tremendous sacrifice to establish better socioeconomic lifestyle for our communities. The workers in particular have done without wages for more than a year at a time to force corporations to deal with fair wages, fair benefits. Some of the things that the workers and some local politicians have accomplished over those 50 years is that they did establish that fair wages had to go in concert with cost of living increases. They established that fair wages that included pensions had to be indexed to the cost of living. It's just fair. And they established workplace standards that today benefit all of us. They accomplished a great deal for us that we should not forget. As these were accomplished, staff, management, and the public also gained from these sacrifices. And those sacrifices supported the Ontario Municipal Act enshrining of elected representative responsibilities. Section 224 says the council is to represent the public and to consider the well-being and interest of the municipality and to maintain financial integrity of the municipality. Those were major steps forward in how municipalities were supposed to be run. So where are we today? Well, there's three key facts. The people responsible for those improvements are now entering or already in their senior years. The improvements are being eroded and diminishing the quality of life for all Sudburyans. And that erosion is diminishing or destroying the quality of life for current and future generations. So what's happening to those seniors that accomplished all this, or even the general public? This graph has three lines on it, one at the far left, one in the middle, and a dotted one on the right. The one on the far left is based on Statistics Canada census of 2011. And what they do is they show the population distribution in Greater Sudbury. As time progressed, the middle one shows in 2016 what happened to that population. And basically not much happened, except that line shifted by 5 years. 2021 has been 2020 has been extrapolated from that and shifted over accordingly. There has been very minimal change in our population distribution. The under 20s are the block on the left. The block on the right is over 65s. The circle with the shading that you just saw come up in the 45 to 65-year-old cohort is a vacuum that existed in our highest income earners in the city. We had already lost a portion of our high income earners. Those high income earners also have higher levels of disposable cash. They pay higher taxes. We were losing even in 2011. In 2016, we lost even more of them. The follow-in population of young people didn't increase. That part of the line did not go up. It followed across and simply moved by the 5 years, or 4 or 5 years. And what did increase was the over 65s. By 2020, that under 20 still has not increased. It's still sliding along at the same level. The vacuum in the high income earners has grown even more. And those over 65 has increased dramatically. So if we assume that that curve is going to slide again, what will it look like? Well, that's what it looks like. The peak of our population will be in the 85-year-olds, 60 to 85-year-olds. Our block of 40 to 65 years will be almost empty, and the youth following in behind hasn't grown and won't be growing according to all statistics and all projections. This is a little difficult to follow, and it might be easier to follow if I show you what the Stats Canada statistics and projections show. This is from Stats Canada. The curve of population growth, as you can see, from 2016 to 2020 is in steep decline. Most of that decline is from non-permanent workers and population. These are people, temporary people that come in, and then they leave, more come in, and then they leave. Well, they're not coming in anymore. They're all going away. And the net international people has gradually tapered off to where it's almost flatlining. So the growth there now appears to be becoming a stable growth with no real growth beyond that. The net natural growth, or net interprovincial growth, has dried up. We're not moving back and forth between provinces like we did. And those that came into Sudbury during the 2016 to 2018-19 time period aren't coming anymore. So we have a problem with our population, and to exaggerate that, our net natural population, this is our births versus our deaths. It's flatlined since 2000. So where are we going to get people to work for and pay those taxes that we are imposing, that we are increasing? Further to that is the city has a focus on domestic product, gross domestic product. However, gross domestic product is only relative to our competitive position in the world. Higher gross domestic product is indicative of lower employment. As you can see from the graph, the bars are gross domestic product and the line is employment levels. As the gross domestic product increases, the employment level drops. That's because North American industry, North American economy views gross domestic product improvements as getting rid of labor. They do not look at efficiencies like other countries do. So if they need to improve their efficiencies, they try to make more product by firing a few people. That's where we're at. And if you look at the right-hand side of that, you can see that in 2020 to 2022, Stats Canada is predicting a GDP growth, which means an employment decline. CGS, our city, has promoted a mythology. They will try to tell you that infrastructure spending promotes and improves gross domestic product. That is wrong. Typically, less than 10% of municipal infrastructure spending actually affects the GDP. And that 10% is tied to trade and transportation. The balance, the 90%, is neutral or negative to GDP, and that money typically is spent on social housing, community centers, arenas, swimming pools, and that type of thing. So our employment's going down. Yeah, our GDP may be a little more competitive, but there's less people gaining benefit from it, and certainly the ability to pay taxes is going to be going down. So what's the impact on taxpayers? Well, this is from the Ontario government, and the graph on the left, they indicate that in 2020 to 21, there's going to be a $7 billion decrease in personal income tax as a revenue to the province. There's going to be a $2.6 billion sales tax decrease. That means people are going to be spending less money. There's going to be a $9 billion decrease in corporation tax. That means corporations are going to be making less money. And a $1.8 billion decrease in other revenues. Coincidentally, for every $1 billion of revenue for the province, it's equivalent to about 19% of decline. Equivalent to about 1%. So that 7% decline in provincial income tax is very roughly equivalent to 7% decline in incomes. The sales tax reflects that. People won't have the money to be spending to buy things. If that's happening all over Ontario, Sudbury usually follows behind Ontario. We can look forward to that happening to us as well. The chart on the right shows the predictions from Stats Canada for household incomes for Ontario. And as you can see, 2018 was pretty positive. 2019, it declined a little bit. 2020, and keep in mind, this is before the influence of the pandemic. They were predicting a 5.1% decline in household incomes for Ontario. Even with some stimulus, such as infrastructure spending, they predicted that that decline was still going to be 3.1%. That says that the household income, which generally suffers when property taxes go up, is going to be declining this year, and when the pandemic results come in, we don't know where it's going to go. So what does this mean as far as load is on taxpayers? And interestingly enough, the population numbers here may be the basis of some of the manipulation numbers that we hear from the Chair of Finance and the errors that were mentioned by the Mayor, in that those population numbers that are shown there are out of the sheets in the budget binder, but they are not the greater Sudbury population. Those are the metro population around greater Sudbury. They include Marks Day, Warren, Whitefish Lake Reserve, and Wapato Lake First Nation Reserve. That accounts for about 4,000. In 2016, the population of greater Sudbury was 161,800. A big difference. And when you look at the load on the taxpayers, you should be considering the 161,000, not the 164,000, because those 4 areas, or 3 areas, no, there's 4 areas, do not pay property tax in the city of Greater Sudbury. So, moving down the table, load on taxpayers per thousand population, and these are in real dollars for the year that they were incurred. But as you can see, the number of city employees per thousand population has increased by 1.5%. The population didn't change, but the number of employees at the city certainly did. City expenses have increased by 22.4%. City revenues, 23.2%. Provincial grants only increased by 11.9%. User fees increased by 29.3%. And property taxes by 25.96%. Inflation, though, only increased by 8.96%. I mentioned earlier that wages and that go hand in hand with inflation. So what happened in income? Well, between 2014 and 2018, and I couldn't find figures for 2019, 2020 yet, but from 2014, 2018, wages increased roughly equivalent to inflation. And if you extrapolate out the 2018 number to 2020, you'll find that about 8.5% increase in wages, both on their average incomes and median. That says the wages are following inflation, or inflation is following wages. Speaking of pensions, and this, I have to apologize, did not come from city pages, did not come from government pages. This is personal experience. I worked for INCO for many years, and I was in a management position. I had what was considered a top-line pension at the time. My pension between 2012 and 2018 from INCO or Valet only increased by 2.75%. Canada Pension, which supplements my pension from INCO Valet, increased by 14.19%. That's because when I turned 65, Canada Pension kicked in higher and Valet INCO reduced their pension, so my pension stayed roughly the same. And combined pension in those from 2014 to 2018 went up by 5.49%. I had to go all the way back to 2012 to get that percentage up to that level. I have a fairly good pension from Valet INCO. There are many in this city who don't have those benefits. So what does that look like graphically? Well, the 4 blocks on the left are spending, user fees, property taxes, and payroll. Those are cumulative percentages. So in 2019 or 2020, the tall lines there are the amount that they have increased since 2014. And for example, city spending has increased by more than 20%. It's about 22%. User fees have increased by close to 30%. Property taxes, about 24 point something. Payroll has increased by over 20%. But the taxpayer capacity is shown in the right 2 blocks. Inflation has only gone up by about 10%, and wages across the province and also in the city have also increased by about 10%. That tells you that city spending and city budgets have increased between 2 to 3 times the rate of our ability to pay. That's a sobering thought. So what is our vision? What is the public vision for 2021? And you saw this slide of those who saw the phase 1. We are hoping for smooth financial sailing. And as I stated at that presentation, the reality is you cannot sail when you're submerged in the undertow. So let's take a look at our future a bit. We should be planning for our future now. And the Chinese proverb that says the journey of 1,000 miles begins with 1 step is very applicable. What do? We need to hit a pause button. We need to pause what we're doing and take a very sober second thought look at what we're doing financially as a city. Step 2, we need to institute a cultural change that recognizes the plight of the population and accommodates that plight. Step 3, we need to change our budget process to make sure that the population is getting value for their money. I don't think there's anyone in this city who can say that they haven't seen a lot of wastage by how our taxes get spent. That has to stop. We need to find ways of making that stop. So what about the financial tsunami? Okay, in 2018, I predicted the tsunami was coming, and that was based on a number of predictions. 4 of those predictions I've highlighted in red because those predictions are ones that we can do something about. We can make a difference on those. But do not think for a minute that those other conditions have gone away. They are still progressing. And one thing that I didn't mention in the other presentation was that the Bank of Montreal Blue Book came out today, and in that they identified that in the last 5 years, car assemblies in this province of Ontario have declined by 20%. That 20% affects all the supply chain. It affects dependence on the workers in that chain. That's a pretty sobering thought in itself. What's been the pandemic role? Well, the conditions created by the financial tsunami seen herein all occurred prior to this pandemic. The pandemic impact on our societal environment, beyond what's already known, is not known. We have no idea what the outfall is going to be. Some predictors are trying to predict it, but we really have no idea because we don't know, first of all, if there's going to be a second wave and what that second wave will entail. So it's extremely difficult to predict what's coming. It's already adding to the financial stress that's been demonstrated herein. And it's created a cause for pause in our financial dealings to allow us to address the world economic correction and pandemic economic fallout. That one we don't know yet, but if we're not prepared to address it, we're going to be behind the 8 ball. So in summary, in phase 1, we showed you that spending is far greater than it needs to be, and it's not being spent on the essentials that we need. It's being spent on wants. We are dedicated to an arena, event center. We're dedicated to a library. We're dedicated to an art gallery. Those do nothing for economic growth. At best, we'll transfer employees from the downtown arena to the new arena if and when it gets built. The same with the library, the same with the art gallery. There's no new employment there. But we're looking at $200 million worth of expenditures on those. Phase 2, I hope I've shown you how difficult it's going to be for us as taxpayers to pay for all of that stuff. And it's not going to be easy. We're going to have people leaving this city because they can't find work here. That's going to put the burden even heavier on the rest of us. So we have to be cognizant of that. Right now, we've seen part of the results of it. As I mentioned earlier, the General Soup Kitchen in 1880 was a recession that lasted 16 years. Over 1 million people in the population of those days left Canada and went to the US. Today, we have a recession starting in 2020. We don't know when it's going to end. And as an indication, in place of the soup kitchens, our arena now is being used to feed the homeless, the numbers of which are increasing, to clothe the homeless, and again, the numbers are increasing. We need to do something to reverse that trend. And it is a serious, serious trend. The words of Einstein, Albert Einstein, come to mind. He said, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results. So if we continue with overview budgets, if we continue to have the disadvantaged numbers increase, if we continue to have expenses exceed capacity to pay, if our wants are replacing our needs, if people remain unheard, if the voice of the taxpayers isn't heeded by those who represent us, and if our existing culture persists, where we focus on arts and we focus on education, we focus on health services, with no one to pay for that. They all depend on an income from industry. We're not addressing that, and if we don't address it, and we continue on with what we're doing, this will be the results. The beauty of graphs today is that you can extend a trend line beyond the database. That's what I've done here. I took the trend line for how much money the city is pulling out of taxpayers' pockets. That trend line extended out to 2022 shows over almost a 9% increase over 2015. The current council and city has increased the amount of money they're taking out of the city for municipal purposes by almost 9% in those years. However, at the same time, the line at the bottom indicates how much the capacity for taxpayers to pay for that has increased. And that's only increased roughly 10.5% to 11%. 10% right now, going to about 11, maybe 11.5. I'm sorry. Yeah, in the future. We can't afford it. It's that simple. These are trends. These don't depend on the exact numbers from the budget cost being to the proper cent or the proper $1,000. These are trends. This is what has been happening. And it's been happening every year, accumulating to, as you see there in 2020, the amount of money they take from the population far exceeds the ability of the population to pay for it. By 2022, which is our next election, that will grow even more, and we cannot afford to wait for the election to correct it. We need to push the pause button now. So what it needs now, we need to pause spending on wants. We need detailed accounting of expenses. Is zero-based budgets from the bottom up one solution? Possibly. There may be other solutions, but there are different means of getting there. That is a fact. That isn't a supposition. Whether this is the right one or not is immaterial. We need to be finding the one that works. We need major reductions in financial waste. And as I stated earlier, I don't think there's anyone in the city who can't identify where we waste tax dollars. And we need stringent control of costs to budgets. When we get, as you saw in the first phase, when we get $18 million a year in overruns, that is unacceptable. But it is an interesting number. And I mentioned earlier about the Standard & Poor's credit rating. And again, the comments by the mayor and the chair of finance that there were inaccuracies and manipulations, that may be true because the overruns that we see on our budget sheets weren't reflected in the Standard & Poor's numbers. In fact, the Standard & Poor's numbers showed $60 to $75 million surpluses in our operating budgets. That's what they based our AA rating on. But our budget sheets show a deficit of 18 million, not 65 million, not 75 million surplus. That's a huge difference. Like you're pushing close to $100 million difference. So where the manipulation was, if there was manipulation, how these numbers are different, why they're different, I certainly can't explain, but I think somebody at the city owes us an explanation. And since Mayor Bigger has stated that this needs to stop, he's absolutely right. He needs to find out how that information is getting generated and put a stop to it. That's my conclusion for today. I hope you've gotten a lot out of this. There are much more presentations that could be made because we could take into account detailed breakdowns of a lot of things, fire services, roads, police services, parks and rec, almost every department of the city we could make presentations on. We have chosen not to do that because that's getting into the weeds, and at this point in time what we need is to pause and let our city council and staff get into those weeds and pull the weeds out and leave productive growth. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you've all appreciated what you've seen here, and we'll see what follows out in the next little while. I would like to thank Michael Bagnini and Bob Hibbs for their help in reviewing the data and their contributions to helping me to improve the quality of our slides. Thank you both. And thank you all for listening. Goodbye for now. Thank you.